Hello, everyone. This room, I think, is going to serve two purposes today. One, a presentation about common redesign pitfalls and how to avoid them, and two, maybe some nap time after lunch if you had the brownie sundae or the mashed potatoes, right? My name is Gus Krustalis. I'm with Beacon Technologies. We actually have a booth right outside there as well, if you ever have any follow-up for the rest of the conference here. And Beacon's been a partner for Cascade CMS since 2006, been around since 1998 overall. A lot of web development work, consultation, design, strategy, et cetera, digital marketing in the higher ed space with Cascade and beyond. I've been with Beacon since 2012. I've been in digital marketing since 2007. A lot of my focus is on the analytics side and managing some of our larger clients. For this particular presentation, I'm actually going to get outside of my comfort zone a little bit, and we're going to cover redesign from a few different areas. So we're going to cover it a little bit from an analytics perspective, a little bit from a digital marketing perspective as well, and then also the actual design and development. For some of those parts that I'm not personally as well versed in, my counterpart Kiana Lynch is going to help with the Q&A part at the very end, and maybe correcting any mistakes that I might have along the way. So before we get into the first of the 7 pitfalls that we're going to discuss, I'll just go ahead and lay some groundwork here. So for the purpose of this presentation, what constitutes a pitfall? That probably there was a lack of time or resources that were allocated at the onset of the project, and later in the project realized, oh shoot, maybe that's a place where we shouldn't have skimped on budget, maybe we should have skimped somewhere else, or we shouldn't have at all. Some of them could have been related to process breakdown. Some of them could have been related to an unknown or forgotten consequence of the redesign, that maybe you had everything in there that you originally scoped, and the process went along well, but this was one of those learning experiences where, you know, we just didn't even think about that, or we didn't have the experience to think about it, or whatnot. So we've been doing this for a while. We've learned along the way, so we're sharing some of that, and we've also had some clients that we've helped that in previous redesigns that they had some mistakes that they didn't want to make again. So we've kind of developed this list from there. We definitely want to have as objectives here that you learn from what others have experienced. Maybe have some aha moments. Discover how, if you are going to start a redesign project soon, or if you're in the middle of it and you want to make sure that it ends well, or if you just even recently launched one and this is going to kind of help double check a couple things for you, then you can have some success in any of those venues. Again, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. I know this is a 45-minute session, and I don't plan on speaking for 45 minutes. There should be plenty of time for questions. All right, so let's get started here. The first one is related to Google Analytics. Transferring the existing tracking code incorrectly is something, or actually even incomplete, is something that has been experienced before that we've heard from some clients. So in each of these, when we go over, I'm going to start by talking about what the risk or the result of the pitfall can actually be, and with this one it's pretty clear, right? You have data and then all of a sudden you don't. And one of the big problems with this is, if any of you are somewhat familiar with Google Analytics, a feature that they have is called custom alerts. So you can have an email sent to your Google Analytics login account that'll let you know when certain metrics have drastically changed, and you can set them however you want. Perhaps in this case it would be, let me know if my traffic goes to 0, or let me know if my traffic is cut by 50%, or something like that, right? It's, it's obviously reactionary, and it's an email that you would get the day after that data is recorded, so it's about a 24-hour lag. But it's a lot better than not logging into Google Analytics for 2 weeks and then seeing, oh shoot, we don't have 2 weeks worth of data, what happened, right? So a couple of reasons how this issue could occur. You know, perhaps the base tracking code that you have was not applied everywhere that it needed to be applied. Maybe when transitioning, you realize that not only do you have base tracking, but your website also has some custom tracking snippets, and you didn't account for the custom tracking snippets. This is actually one where I saw with a client where we were doing digital marketing work for, they had another firm doing their redesign. In the middle of the redesign, they asked for us to check on a few different things on some of their test pages. And what we found was, we looked at their analytics because, again, we're doing digital marketing and that's where a lot of decision making comes from. And so we said, well, we see your base tracking, but we don't see all these other snippets of code that your current site currently has. You need to add all of those. And the response from their web development partner was, that's out of scope for this project. And really, in that situation, the responsibility is of the website owner, right? It's not the web development partner's responsibility to understand and scope the analytics needs unless you've contracted them for a strategy phase, right? And we do that in our strategy phases when we develop. But in this case, it's the website owner that they need to understand this is, we want our Google Analytics to transition one-to-one. We don't just want base, like I think with that specific example, in their boilerplate contracts, the web development partner listed, we would transfer existing base tracking code. So good lesson learned there. The last one is if you have dynamic variables associated with your tracking, right? You're going to have new HTML for this website. Your CSS is probably going to be new, right? So if some of these variables are dependent on the HTML or the styling of your site and you don't account for that when you transition to the tracking, then you're going to lose tracking for those elements. So how to avoid? The first step there is one that we don't see clients proactively take themselves. It's one that we encourage every single time, and that is have a strategic plan for your analytics. You guys already know a redesign project is so big with so many moving parts in and of itself that this is probably something that doesn't get thought of very often. But I mean, this is the lifeblood of decision making from your website. So have a strategic plan for your website's analytics. Along with that, you need to assess what's currently being tracked on your website and create a log of that so that when you're scoping out the redesign project and the analytics behind it, you already have a list that you can go by. And obviously, you probably get the point now that this is something that needs to be done when you're figuring out everything that's going to be included in the redesign project, not after the contract is signed and you've begun designing. Note any relevant HTML changes that are going to take place and recode any customizations as needed, any dynamic variables. What our developers utilize a lot, specifically with Cascade, is we'll put the analytics tracking in an include file, right? At least the base tracking or a Google Tag Manager or something like that, right? So that it doesn't require a full site publish if you have to make any tracking code updates. That's definitely a great feature that we really like in the Cascade CMS. Of course, you've got to do pre and post launch testing and validation to make sure that there's continuity with your data tracking, all right? And that's not just logging in and making sure that you're continuing to see data accrue. That's going on the site yourself and clicking things and looking in real-time reporting in Google Analytics and recording things that you're doing on the website and seeing if data is coming in exactly as you would expect. Excuse me. Second one is also related to analytics, and that's skipping over tracking improvements. I see this with almost every website redesign project that I've been involved in where budget is more critical than you would normally expect. Okay, but budget is always critical, but in a lot of cases where it's just, this is the main thing, this is what we need to get done, we need to get the redesign launched by this certain date, it's got to have this many templates, and so on and so forth. Well, what happens during the strategy phase is we can come along and say, well, here's everything that's being, that we can learn out of your data now to influence a redesign, right? But there are limitations because there are not as many data metrics and reports in here as could be. For those of you who don't know, Google Analytics is very robust even though it's free. So just imagine on your new website, you're going to have new header navigation. your homepage slider or impact image is going to be new, and that's the like prime real estate. You know, your homepage obviously is the #1 visited page on your site, and that area of real estate is what all the eyeballs see. You're going to have new content blocks in your various templates, and you're probably going to have new call to action graphics to get admission activity or alumni activity, giving, visiting, etc. Right? So wouldn't you think that you want to know how people are interacting with those? If you're doing the base tracking, it's really not going to be enough to get great information on all those different aspects of your new site launch, okay? So can you improve your data reporting? And it's a great time to do that alongside a redesign. Just imagine here, these are different pockets of data collection and analysis for a website, right? You can learn about your visitors, what marketing channels brought them there, what's their geographic information, their device usage, and so forth, right? Content interactions. The thing I want to stress here is that's not just page views and bounce rate. What did they click while they were on there? Did they watch a video? Did they respond to a call to action? We have calls to action in 2 different places on the page. Which one did they click? You know, we know the page view that loads after they click it, but which one of those did they click, right? We're giving a visitor a lot of different options on a page. Which ones are they interacting with? And there's a lot more that could be done there than what we typically see when we first start a relationship with a client. And the last one's conversions. Believe it or not, I've seen a lot of Google Analytics accounts where no goal conversions had been configured yet, or maybe one, or maybe the goal conversion configurations were just based on, oh, they viewed a contact form page or a contact information page or a download page, but the goal isn't actually, did they complete the action? So there might be opportunities to add more goal completions. The best way to think about this is, what are the objectives of the website? And does my analytics support being able to answer questions about those objectives? And I think if you have that mindset right there, then you can begin to have some easy answers to questions of, you know, we know that when people come to the website, we want them to, and fill in the blank. Okay, are we able to track that activity? All right, so you get that answered first, and then you figure out, okay, well, what other actions on the website could influence whether or not they complete that activity? And when you start to come up with those answers, then you can figure out, okay, well, these are the different things that need to be tracked on the site. And again, if you're going through a redesign soon, maybe you don't need to invest in doing all of that for your current site because it's going to change in 6 to 12 months. But these are definitely things that would be included in a redesign that are missed. And frankly, if you don't do things like this, it's going to be difficult to really measure the success, right? Some of the different features in Google Analytics that will help you solve this are event tracking, which at its most common usage is non-page view activity. So the example that I gave about clicking a call to action graphic or button, or watching a video or downloading a document, those are all examples of how you can use event tracking that page view reporting doesn't really give you enough information on. Custom dimensions. This is specific to the universal syntax of Google Analytics, right? So it's the most current version. Custom dimensions, what we like to use most frequently for is audience segmentation, right? One of the unique things about a higher ed website in particular is that it has to cater to multiple audiences. Typically, the primary audience is prospective students, though, but in some cases it's community or alumni. And so I know always that from a design and a marketing standpoint, the homepage of a higher ed website has a really tough job because you have all those audiences starting there. And what do you do? Well, custom dimensions is a great way to do audience segmentation, right? You figure out what are some pages or activities on the website where I have a high degree of confidence that only this audience is going to do or visit or reach. And I'm going to identify those, and then I'm going to use custom dimension coding to tag those things so that I can build an audience in Google Analytics and report specifically off of those. Because if you're not doing that, if you're only doing global data and your target audience is only one of those 4 or 5 groups, it's really tough to get specific answers on conversion rate or traffic totals related to your target audience. Goal conversions we talked about earlier. Cross-device reporting is utilizing a feature called User ID, where if your website happens to have a login feature, that Google Analytics tracks on those pages, or if you're really good at getting email signups or contact form submissions, then you could utilize user ID. Offline data integration, it's something we try to stress a lot, especially since the ultimate action for a higher ed website takes place offline. Google Analytics gives you the opportunity to send offline data in to integrate with the website activity. Now, there were a lot of different things on that one slide, and I really want to stress that you don't have to do all of those at once. I think it's great to take one of those as a starting point and get that underway. Maybe it doesn't have to be perfect or completely built out, but get started and then just consider them mini projects along the way, and eventually you'll have it green all the way through that you can do really confident reporting with all these areas of website activity. The third one is related to digital marketing and brand visibility, and that's Seo Health. In this particular case, improperly planned 301 redirects. Oops, excuse me. Right, so here's how you know that you need to pay attention to this one. Are your URL extensions going to change? Pretty much all the time, the answer is yes. Is your website going to go from non-secure to secure? Is that part of this redesign launch? Are you consolidating pages on the new site? You know, people love doing that. You know, we've got a bloated site now. We're going to refine it down, and we're not going to transfer all of our URLs over to the new site. We're going to figure out how to consolidate it. Are you deleting a mobile site and going responsive? Excuse me. These are all examples of when you would need 301 redirects. If you miss this, the risks are twofold. You're going to lose visibility with search engine results, which hurts your overall brand visibility in the marketplace. And number two, on your website, you're going to create a bad user experience for site search. Just real quick, I know that at this conference the crowd is a little more technical, but I still want to make sure that I just cover this part for anyone that doesn't know. A 301 redirect is a server-side configuration. It sends the user from their originally intended URL to the URL that you need them to go to instead. And it helps preserve SEO value, and that SEO value carries over to your site search experience. So how to avoid? First and foremost, understand if there are going to be mandatory changes to URL structure. The second thing is gather any information that you can about content consolidation. Any pages that are going to be deleted where you feel like there might need to be a redirect. And I'll go ahead and say this, just because a page is going to be deleted doesn't mean that it has to have a one-to-one partner for a redirect. It might be a case where you have a whole set of pages that are going to be deleted, and all of those can get redirected to, you know, a parent page, right? Maybe it's the academic program's homepage, or maybe it's the overall website's homepage. Plan your redirect strategy. So what I mean by this is, in some cases, you're going to need one-to-one redirects. Some of the pages are important enough that you want to send them to the exact same page, but it unfortunately has to have a different URL. So you'd have a set of one-to-one redirects. Typically, we like to fall somewhere in the 100 to 200 range in terms of how many one-to-one redirects. We like to be a little closer to 100 if that's the case. The way that we get the answer to what pages are included in that, you know, we would look at current search engine rankings. What pages of your site are currently ranking high on the first page of Google search results, that if someone were to find that after your redesign launch, that they would still be able to get the content that you need them to see. The other is in Google Analytics. What are the top pages that people are hitting on your site? And you take the data from both of those, and I think you can determine where the one-to-one redirects would go. Everything else could be batch redirects. Obviously, just like with analytics tracking, this is something that you would want to test and validate before and after launch. Second one is also related to digital marketing, and that's Seo Health. And the one that we see here is not managing site crawlability. There are some relations here to this one, to the last one, and that is that You would lose visibility in search engine results, and you would create a bad user experience in site search if site crawlability is not managed correctly during the redesign process. The big difference here is that in some cases it could cause the website to be de-indexed from the search engines if there are like egregious issues that are caused here. So in terms of SEO management, here are some areas that you need to have active management on throughout the redesign process. One is with the robots.txt file, and something I'll tell you that this is an example of how a whole site can get de-indexed from Google, and this is just a complete oversight that's really easy to avoid if you are managing your robots.txt file. So you obviously don't want your test or demo site to be indexed by Google search. So your test or demo site has its own robots.txt file that disallows everything from the search engines to be able to crawl and index, right? What we've unfortunately seen sometimes is that when a client promotes their site to production, that robots.txt file got promoted to production also. And so in production, it was disallowing the entire website from being crawled or indexed by Google search. An XML sitemap. So we talked earlier about 301 redirects. Your URLs might change, some pages might drop off, some new pages might be added. You're going to need to have an updated XML sitemap at the time of your site launching. Of course, we always recommend that you update your XML sitemap ongoing, especially for sites like higher ed where there's content creation going all the time. Google Search Console and Bing Webmaster Tools. I included Bing Webmaster Tools because it's important enough to make sure that you're managing your site on the second biggest search engine in the world also. So those are areas where if that's somewhere that you've never logged into, you can see reports of 404 errors or other status code errors. You can see your site crawlability. You can fetch URLs as if you were the Google bot, so you can do some testing on there yourself. It'll show you how many pages are crawled. Submit your XML sitemap through this, and it'll tell you how many URLs it picked up in the sitemap and how many ended up getting indexed. A lot of great features in here that you can make sure that you know exactly where your site crawlability stands. And then actually go to Google and Bing and do searches and make sure that your pages are showing up. Perform branded searches. Perform a site colon search with your domain after that and see how many pages it's showing in the Google index or in the Bing index. So the fifth one, we're going to get onto the design and development side. And this one, for quality control, if you're cutting corners during device, browser, and/or user acceptance testing. So here's what could happen if this is a place where you cut corners. Number one, you're going to encounter browser compatibility issues. Number two, your mobile ranking specifically for SEO could drop if you're not paying attention to device testing. You could create load time issues and high bounce rate due to the load time issues. What you definitely don't want to have happen is the second to last one here, and that's where users become your testers. And perhaps that happened because there was some cost cutting going on, and I'm sure you guys well know, especially anyone in here who's already been through a redesign, that when users become your testers, you end up paying those costs anyway, and you pay them after launch. And that's after there was a bad user experience. And that's what goes in the last bullet point there, is that you have increased project costs from rework of development. So how to avoid, and I know this is really high level, and I get that. All we can say at this point in this format is plan enough testing time, and that's more than you probably think. So if you have a web development partner, really spend time on this part of the project planning to figure out what really makes sense. All right, if you're doing this in-house, lean on the experience that you have. If there's not much experience there, then reach out at least for a strategic partner to figure out, okay, what kind of testing time should there be? And that's not just time actually spent in front of the screens testing everything out, but that's actually time on your project calendar also. So when you're looking at your launch date that you're going to plan there for, make sure that you've got enough time after everything's on the site in the demo environment that you've allowed for all stakeholders and testers to go in there and perform everything that they need to. I can tell you candidly, when I first got involved in this, because I'm heavy on the digital marketing side, so when I first got involved in these kinds of projects, and I would look at a project calendar and see that, oh, there were 4 weeks for device browser and user acceptance testing. I was like, well, all the work's going to be done before then because there's so much coding and content entry and so on and so forth that needs to be done. That's just like a dead period for 4 weeks. And it didn't take me long to realize that that's probably when most of the work actually happens and when people are more stressed out because they've only given themselves 4 weeks to get all that stuff tested and worked out. And you guys know how massive higher ed sites can be. So a lot of time right there. During a strategy phase, before you actually begin your designs, you can use your analytics data and figure out which browsers, versions, and devices is your current audience already using. So you don't have to make assumptions for any decision making related to that. There was an example where we saw that one client had one mix of browser and version usage off campus than on campus. And on campus, it was older versions. And through talking, we said there might be some performance issues with some of these computer labs and so forth on campus because they're using IE7. And come to find out that there was some specific software that was used on campus that the current version of Internet Explorer didn't support, and they couldn't upgrade. So that definitely factored into some design and development decisions. All right, 2 more to go here, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. This one's related to ADA and accessibility. Kiana earlier today told me that she would love to do a talk on this alone, which probably 45 minutes still wouldn't be enough in that case, right? So this is just one of a few, and we can certainly answer some more questions about this a little bit later. The way that I worded it here is waiting until the last minute, and excuse me. Some of the risks here include having some unexpected updates required late in the game, right? So it could be related to content or templates or color schemes, but if there's not enough testing early on, and it's not just testing, it's just paying attention to, even in the design phase, before actually coding the HTML begins, are these designs going to be accepted or pass testing? What's it going to do to the site launch? Is it going to delay us? We're going to get in big trouble here if we don't launch before school begins in the fall, and now we can't because we're out of compliance and we would risk some even bigger issues. Or are you going to launch and be out of compliance and be scrambling there trying to just fix things on the fly? Hopefully not. I would never recommend that, first of all. So an additional risk that could come here is with the content owners. If the content owners aren't aware of what they need to know when they're publishing out content, as it relates to ADA and accessibility. So here are some things to consider on how to avoid this. We think of our redesign projects in 3 phases. One is strategy, the second is design, and the third is the actual development. And it's really important to stress here, in this setting, that all the way in the strategy phase, this needs to be considered. Obviously, it passes through in the design phase. So if accessibility testing and considerations are primarily a development phase thing for you, then we really want to stress that it needs to come a lot earlier. Plan your content with web accessibility in mind, and that's a really easy statement for me to make right here, but I think in terms of more so having some standards and some policy, if you have a lot of different content owners, and making sure everyone's on the same page with what that means is really the key there. Run regular compliance scans during development, content entry, post-launch. One thing that Kiana said to me earlier is that it's not just being able to pass a scan, but it's actually, loading, what's the program called? The screen reader, actually loading a screen reader. You've already seen the website. Would you be able to navigate through it if you had to use a screen reader? So don't just rely on the scans. So here's the last one, it's benchmarking. Not being able to measure redesign success. I'm sure that in a lot of cases, if you're one of the people that has a heavy hand in the redesign, but there are some other stakeholders that once the site launches and they simply say, well, how do we do, or how are we doing? And if all you're able to say is, well, everybody says the site looks great and we're getting more traffic, or less people are bouncing, it's really not good enough, because this statement is false, right? The sole purpose is not to make the website look better. Here are some actual redesign goals, at least from our perspective, and some clients have validated. You want to deliver the quality user experience. You want to connect with your target audiences, which we mentioned earlier during one of the analytics points here. You want to drive admissions opportunities and also donor opportunities. So as I said earlier, higher traffic and lower bounce rate is not a good enough indicator of that list right there. Those are some of the basic metrics you get with out-of-the-box Google Analytics tracking. Some of the additional things that we spoke of earlier could really help answer these questions. So hopefully you've asked yourself this question, or someone's challenged you with this question before, and that is the new website doing a better job of accomplishing these goals than the old website? All right. Hopefully you can say yes when you're asked that question. More importantly, hopefully you can show why with data. All right, so here's how to avoid it. Way out before you begin the project, identify your key performance indicators. So if it's driving admissions activity, what website activity do I know is related to driving admissions, like offline applications, for example? So we know we have a third-party platform for people to submit an application to our school, or we have a relationship with the Common App. We have PDF applications that people can download. Let's go to all those different points and let's make sure that, number one, we have data on that today. And let's set a baseline for it. And then when the site launches, you can obviously measure that because you already have the tracking set up, and hopefully you've transitioned that tracking to the new site. So going through the steps there, you've got your baseline metrics set, you know the numbers. Your website activity is probably very seasonal. It's typically what we see as well. So you don't want to necessarily measure June activity to November, of course. But it's going to make post-launch and data analysis so much easier. See if there was anything left there before I go into the last one. I'm not sure if there was. Quick recap here of these pitfalls to avoid. Incorrect tracking code transition, skipping over the tracking improvements, not planning the 301 redirects correctly, not managing site crawlability at all or not much, cutting corners during testing, accessibility testing being inadequate, and then no benchmarking or follow-up. What I hope here in this setting is that perhaps you've gone through a redesign process in the past, and maybe one of these really hits home with you, or you have it in the plans for 2017, and there are some things here that you've written down just to make sure that you keep in mind. But certainly we just want to stress to you that a lot of stuff you can really handle with yourself, with your project management and your resource allocation. If there are any questions, happy to answer them. We've got a few minutes left for it. Well, I don't know if that's good or not good.
One of the things you mentioned in the second pitfall was offline data integration.
Sure.
Can you maybe talk about a couple examples of data integration that you think has been helpful with your clients, that they have either uploaded data or they've used that data integration in a specific way?
Yeah, sure. So in the higher ed setting, submitted applications is a great example, right? So we know We're measuring prospective student totals on the website. We've got that custom dimension set up, and we're measuring how many people download the application or click through the third-party site to start the application, and that's where our goal tracking stops on the site, right? So by getting a data feed from the admissions department that says these are all submitted applications, right? We can process, not just we, anyone can take that data feed and process it in a format to send into Google Analytics, where you would just determine how do you want that to be set up in Google Analytics. And it takes some mapping, and it means this in our database and it needs to mean that in Google Analytics and so forth. So just mapping those dimensions, right? So that you can send it in and it can count as, you can configure it as a goal. You can set up a custom dashboard or report essentially to say, it's going to be a daily feed that runs, and so every night this is going to kick through and Google Analytics is going to receive and process the data. So we know our submitted application activity, and we can measure those totals in our dashboard reporting versus our on-site activity. We had this many people download the application or start the application, and now we see this is the actual number of submitted applications that we got in that same day, for example. The way that you could see it at a user level is by having a unique identifier come along with each record that comes through in the feed, right? And what I mentioned earlier about tracking improvements in number 2 for cross-device reporting, that utilizes the user ID feature for Universal Analytics. So it is possible to create some matches in some cases, right? So if one of the individuals that submitted an application also signed up for an admissions tour or submitted some other contact form or some way where you could create a user record for them on the website side, then you could make a connection and see, oh, well, X number of people who schedule a tour end up submitting an application. You would actually be able to report on something like that.
Do you have any clients that are actually doing that?
We do have clients that are doing that, but not in the higher ed space. So we have some e-commerce clients that are doing that. We have some that are lead generation only that in the multifamily industry, so like apartment rentals or whatever, that they know that 70% of their leads come through their website, and they want to know the impact that it had on actual leasing applications. So we do that too.
We want every client to do that, and I don't know anyone that's doing it currently.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Sure. Yes.
So the university where I work, our centralized IT manages the technology, like the technical aspect of a lot of this stuff. And we actually just went through a rebrand of the university. Our marketing department handles all the content management and working with individual departments to make sure that their content is all on their website. So in the case of like this list, sometimes the responsibilities are split between IT versus marketing. It's not all centralized in one office. Do you have any recommendations how to kind of overcome some of the boundaries of that in terms of making sure that they understand the technical aspects? Like I use the 301 redirects as a good example, where we have some sites that are being condensed down from 10 pages to 2 pages, and that's not really being communicated well enough to them, I think. So is there any way that like you can recommend that we deal with that?
In your example there, is that maybe where the content people know that consolidation's happening, but on the technical side you weren't informed that that's happening, perhaps, or some?
In the case that they don't realize that when someone visits a URL that might be on print material somewhere, they've condensed that page and moved it somewhere else, that URL will now be broken.
Right.
So we manage the redirects, but they have to ask for the redirects. Do you understand what I mean? So there's like a disconnect there.
Yeah.
So I mean, is there any way that we can mitigate that risk that you could recommend?
The first place that I would start is definitely on the project management side, and I think that what we've experienced from the project management side is that when scoping these things out, I don't think we've had an example yet where everything was known and accounted for as early as we would like. What usually happens is, oh, we need to make sure that we're also going to do that. But the way that we come up with that is the project manager makes sure that there are subject matter experts or stakeholders from each area in as many meetings as possible, right? So that there's as much info sharing going on, whereas, and that was a good lesson that we learned a long time ago, where there used to just be a lot of segregated meetings, right? And so what we found was that there wasn't enough info sharing for, say, like marketers and technical staff, so the meetings started to get combined to where it might be a technical discussion, and then someone on the content or the marketing side would say, oh, if you do that, then this, or whatever, right? So I guess what I would boil that down to is making sure that whoever is managing the project at the highest level understands that they need to have key stakeholders or subject matter experts included as often as possible to at least give them the opportunity to hear what's going on and speak up on potential ramifications or work that their side would also need to do in response. Because I don't think there's a really good example of a project manager that could really touch on all those disciplines, right? So I think that would probably be the first way to go. You have something?
Yeah, from a technical perspective, I would also look at using workflows more for it to come through so you're at least notified or get some form of messaging so that you can see when pages are being deleted, names changed or moved. And then also we in-house, and we have 3 different departments, and so we're constantly working with marketing, and I'm on the technical side of things. We make everyone keep release notes documents. So any pages they touch, change, rename, they have to keep detailed release notes and then send them over to the technical side so that we can see what's going on the website. It's really simple. I changed this page. Here's what I did. And here's the URL to it. So then when we do need 301 redirects, we can send it over to the IT department. And we just have someone in-house just really keep track of that. But any content owner just makes a change, just has to keep up with it.
Yes.
How long do you keep 301 redirects active? I mean, after you put them in?
I would say that I'm trying to come up with like a specific time range to give you, but in the case where you're using a 301 redirect for a page that already ranks high in Google search, you would want to keep that 301 redirect active until you see that Google has updated their index to show the new page instead of the old one. And I don't really have a time range on when Google typically does that. Sometimes it's longer than others, but I mean, they'll see that there's a 301 redirect that their search result that they're serving up is getting, and they'll eventually change that out. If you're putting a 301 redirect in place because it's a really popular page, not necessarily because it showed up in search results, then I don't know if there really is a hard, fast answer. The answer is definitely not forever, because eventually you're going to have new 301 redirects for other reasons or other projects, right? So a great way to know the answer to that is actually, and I wish I thought of this when you first asked me that question, because someone on my team kind of solved this already. What you can do with 301 redirects is you can attach some attribution to the end of it, right? You can put UTM parameters which feed into Google Analytics to identify source medium. So what someone on our team did is for all of the destination URLs, it was source equals redirect or 301 redirect or something, right? So he can run a report and he can see the 301 redirect traffic activity, and he can see when that really starts to go down and make a decision on when to turn off the redirects. Yes?
Quick question. On our end, we have a lot of data when it's low analytics, but our culture, there's no goals, metrics, conversion. What would you suggest an institution like us to improve that and get going with that?
What kind of institution?
It's in the university.
So what kind of goals should you set up?
Like, why should be the first step we take? Because we
Okay, the first step to take is to ask the question of, when someone comes to your website, what's the ultimate thing you want them to do? And the answer to that question should also be a goal that has been configured in Google Analytics. Now, there are different ways to configure goals, and the answer to the question just might be the way that our website currently operates, that it's them downloading something, or it's them submitting a form, or so forth. In other industries, it's a phone call, and that gets a little more difficult, right, to track phone activity in Google Analytics. So I would try to go as close to the ultimate action that you're able to in terms of how your website is configured to set that up as a goal. What you might have to do, if the easiest one would be if it's submitting a certain form or submitting a completed application, right? That if there's a confirmation page at the end, then that's your goal URL. That's the simplest way. But if it's other types of activities, then you might have to configure a virtual page view if there's not an actual confirmation page. Or you might have to configure an event if it's one of a series of actions. And then you can use that as your goal configuration, right? Maybe one more question? All right, I hope it was helpful. Please stop by with any other questions.